Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This session is all about hearing from youth grant makers and their experience grant making. We have 4 youth here with us today who have participated in 2 programs, Youthprise and Learning by Giving. You can start the slideshow, please. So we'll just go through a short agenda. We'll talk about the 2 programs that our youth are joining us from, very high overview of these programs. And then we'll just turn it over to the youth grant makers to talk about their experience. And that'll be the bulk of our session today. And then we'll leave time for Q&A. So please, if you have questions, feel free to just use the Q&A function and there'll be plenty of time at the end to field those questions. Next slide, please. Welcome, Aimee.
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. Hi, y'all. I'm Aimee Vue. I'm the Youth Philanthropy Manager at Youthprise. Youthprise, we are a philanthropic intermediate organization based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, focused on systems work that enable young people to thrive. And so just a little background about us. Our mission is that we increase equity with and for Minnesota's Indigenous, low-income, and racially diverse youth. And we really envision a world where a Minnesotan specific, that where outcomes for youth are no longer predictable by race, geography, or socioeconomic status. We operate a sort of grants plus model where we function similar to a community foundation, but the plus comes from the support for the work around grants that need to happen. And so that includes providing technical assistance and fostering community partnerships. We really focus on grants, research, and philanthropy at Youthprise. Next slide. So just a little bit of our philosophy. We really see that young people are often excluded from processes, practices, and policies that really impact their lives. And so we've found in our work how young people's involvement in decision-making exponentially impacts and reverberates into all of our communities. And so today we'll be talking about how these fit into for the YouthBank philanthropic model. And our work at Youthprise, we love disrupting systems, whether that's research or philanthropy or board representation, and how they operate. And so one in particular is on philanthropy through our YouthBank model. Next slide. So what does YouthBank do? YouthBank is a youth-led grant-making initiative that channels money into projects that will improve the quality of life of local communities. It's also a process and a way of working with young grant makers that encourages and trains them as they develop essential life skills, as well as increase their employability. Next slide. So when we asked young people to define what philanthropy means to their community, they came up with this definition: a collaborative process in which you, driven by their love for others, lead the allocation and redistribution of resources, young people's deep identification with their communities, and their drive to co-create a new reality. And when we ask this of young people, what philanthropy means to them, it's like, of course it's love for their community. So we really believe that young people can be the drivers of redefining what philanthropy is for them. Next slide. So in the process, youth banks grant philanthropic dollars, but it's not just about the money. In the process, young people do community building, research social issues, conduct communications work, create a call for proposal and marketing, evaluate the grants, and celebrate the work they've done in the community. A big goal of YouthBank is to set up a sustained funding source so that young people can fundraise and add funding to it from their community as a response to what young people need. Next slide. And so typically YouthBank is run in person and hosted by either an organization or foundation, but as a response to COVID-19 during the summer of 2020, we pivoted to create a fully online version of YouthBank to make sure that young people could still engage in philanthropy regardless of the pandemic. And so come May 2020, the young people we brought together from all over Minnesota, they wanted to find ways they could respond to the intersection of COVID-19 and what was going on in our backyard with the murder of George Floyd. And so as these young people are talking about what mattered to them across the state, they settled on these 3 important issues of how to direct the funding. It was on racism in the healthcare system, college access during COVID, and food justice. Next slide. And so during the summer, we held community grant workshops to walk folks through what we wanted to fund. And by the end of the summer, these 12 young people re-granted around $25,000 to other young people addressing projects around these issues. It's been really exciting to see how, especially a year after we've done this summer youth bank, but also a year after George Floyd, so much of the community has kind of rallied around to address these issues. And so it's been really exciting to see how they've gone through this process virtually, and Alice and Lia are going to be speaking about it later in their experiences with YouthBank. That's a little bit about Youthprise and YouthBank. I'm gonna turn it over to Shanna to speak about Learning by Giving's work.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. I love YouthBank so much. So I'm so excited to hear from two participants today and just have them in conversation with some Learning by Giving students. So thank you, Aimee, and having your youth here today. So Learning by Giving, we have two students from our Binghamton class, so maybe it makes sense for me to talk about what Learning by Giving does. Our mission here, as you can see, we are founded by Doris Buffett, and we inspire and educate a new generation of philanthropists and community leaders to effectively distribute capital to local communities. Essentially what this means is our students run like a giving circle, where they're learning about the grant making process as they're building it and executing it. They learn about their community needs, determine an impact area, and eventually fund a nonprofit organization in their community. We often say a new generation of philanthropists because we want students to claim that title of philanthropist who have never called themselves a philanthropist. And sometimes next gen refers to like inheriting wealth or passing it on. And we want to really inspire a new generation to call themselves philanthropists and claim that title. Next slide, please. A very high level of what we do in our partnership process. So while Learning by Giving is the funder, our faculty are our greatest resource because they lead students through a grant making process throughout the semester. So our students are 100% in the driver's seat, but our faculty are guiding them as facilitators. And so, we really view it as a partnership rather than as a funder-fundee. Learning by Giving exists in many disciplines, from English to economics, from public service to performing arts. We have courses that are exclusively for freshmen and some that are exclusively for seniors. We have courses that are open to students in any academic year, so lots of voices in the classroom. Because of this wide range, we rely on our faculty to create a course that meets the needs of their students and meets the needs of their course objectives. So Learning by Giving provides financial support, but also grant making support. So I'm no expert in economics, but I can ensure that our students in an economics course are performing a grant making process that is ethical as it works with nonprofits and understands the power and privilege that comes with holding scarce resources. So Learning by Giving provides resources and space for faculty to receive support from one another. We host webinars, faculty conferences, Zoom gatherings, and just try to provide a space where faculty can come together and make sure that they're learning from one another all across the country. At the end of the process, our students determine a nonprofit to fund, and then we write the grant checks. Next slide, please. Even though we exist in many different varieties, there's not Learning by Giving in a box. There are some common grant making models that we see come out of the classroom. One is an RFP model, and that's what you'd see at most foundations. Students, create the RFP and then eventually get in proposals, evaluate them, do site visits, and eventually grant out the funding. We also see a model that is less intrusive or less work for the nonprofits, and that's a theory of change model. Students don't do an RFP, they create a theory of change, they do a lot of research and don't bring in nonprofits until the very end to ask a few questions. We also see a service learning model where students work closely with nonprofits throughout the semester and then turn into grant makers towards the end of the semester and kind of switch roles. Next slide, please. Different disciplines, different models, but we see some common elements across every course in Learning by Giving, and that's looking at a needs assessment. Either they're conducting one or they're looking at one that a community foundation in their community developed. Establishing missions and a mission statement and values, so the students have a core in which to do their grant making from. We also see that due diligence across every class, but due diligence can look as it is meaningful to the students. So it's not, there's not a one set of due diligence that the students do. It's however they find it meaningful. So they determine the criteria that they're going to look at. Collective, collaborative decision making. It should be hard, it should be difficult, but making sure that students are hearing from every voice in the classroom, every perspective coming together. And then lastly, meaningful reflection. So this could look like a grant ceremony. It could look like something different, like maybe they're doing a reflection video or a reflection paper, but students should really look back at their experience and reflect upon it so as to integrate some of the things that they've learned. Next slide, please. Our impact to date over the past about 16 years, our students have directed $3.7 million. Again, 100% student directed. We've had 6,000 students in our classrooms, and we've given grants to more than 800 nonprofits. Next slide, please. So our grant makers today, welcome Alice, Lia, Kassandra, and Jaclyn, and thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. And that's the end of our slideshow. We'll hear from our youth.
Really excited to have this conversation with you all. I will be moderating a little bit and asking some of these folks, the young people, some questions. But if we can just go around and introduce yourselves, give your pronouns, kind of how you got involved, of which, how you got involved / which program you're involved with, and kind of where you're coming from today. And we'll just go around and then I'll dive into the questions. I'll start with Alice, and then if you guys want to popcorn.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I use the pronouns she, her. Currently, I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota, and my involvement with YouthBank has been all throughout my high school experience. I was involved in my local youth bank in my town, and then since graduating, I've been working in the summer youth bank online program that Aimee talked about earlier. And I've also been continuing to stay involved training up new youth banks in towns by my area. And I can popcorn to Kassandra.
Hi everyone, my name is Kassandra. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm currently a rising senior at Binghamton University. And I had experience with the Learning by Giving course at Binghamton University. And that was kind of like my first exposure to what philanthropy was. And I'm actually tuning in from New York City. So I'll popcorn to Lia.
Hi, I'm Lia. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm an undergraduate student at Loyola University of Chicago, so I'm calling in from Chicago today. I became involved with YouthBank and Youthprise after I was previously volunteering at a nonprofit art studio, and YouthBank came in to propose we become a new branch of YouthBank. Unfortunately, COVID kind of put a halt to that, and then my studio ended up closing down due to lack of funding. But I participated in the YouthBank project over the summer of 2020, as Aimee mentioned. And I'm currently a major in philosophy of social justice. So I will be continuing my philanthropy and volunteer work throughout my high school experience, or my college experience, sorry. And then I can pass it off to Jaclyn.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jaclyn. My pronouns are she, her. And I had a very similar experience to Kassandra. I participated in a Learning by Giving class in 2018, I believe. And that was also my first experience with philanthropy and philanthropic giving. Since then, it's completely changed how I've kind of gone into like what I'm doing with my life. And now I'm currently going into a master's program at Binghamton, staying within the community and staying involved within it and hoping I can make a change.
Thanks for introducing yourselves. It's been really wonderful to kind of hear how you got involved, both in high school and in college. And so I'm sure folks are wondering kind of like what your process looks like, right? And choosing the issues you did some grant making around. And so would love to hear from any of you, what did your process look like for selecting an issue area when you were going through your grant making process? Why don't we start with Alice and Lia with YouthBank, and then we'll toss it to Kassandra and Jaclyn.
I can start. So Alice and I worked together with YouthBank, and we worked with a few other students and youth around our community to determine grant areas and like what projects we were really passionate about. And Aimee kind of mentioned what those three areas were because we were looking at the intersection between racial justice and the COVID-19 pandemic. So we looked at kind of racial discrepancies in healthcare. We looked at food justice as there was a lot of destruction to community gardens and like vandalism of communities like stores, specifically around my area because I live in South Minneapolis near where George Floyd was killed. My community kind of worked together to create food banks and stuff, but there were some youth who were really inspired by that and decided to take it into their own communities in other cities and other areas, which was really neat. And so we kind of focused on looking at like food justice, access to education, because that was really difficult for a lot of students who didn't really have the same resources as like more affluent students. So we looked at that, and then we also looked at how like racism and bias can affect like healthcare and treatment received in hospitals and doctors' offices.
Yeah, I would say to like add on to that, I mean, Lia pretty much explained them, like everything about those issues. When we were going through the process of like deciding on those three issues specifically, what we did was we worked in a group of, I think like over 12-ish, Amy's nodding, yeah. And we split up into small groups, and within that, we had each participant do research in like their own experience in their communities and bring in like all of these issues. And the way we decided was we had like a lot of discussions on, hey, what have I seen done with these issues? What's worked? What hasn't worked so far in my community? And that's how we, I guess you could say, narrowed it down to these still like pretty broad three categories.
Kassandra and Jaclyn, could we hear about your experience in selecting the issue process?
So I could start since it's been a while, so I don't really have all of the bits and bobs. But when I was in the philanthropy course, we did it, I think, in the second way that Shauna had mentioned, which was the theory of change. And that's how we kind of went around our grant making strategy. So essentially, a lot of the students at Binghamton who are undergrads aren't from the Binghamton area. We're not too familiar with like the local issues and what's going on. So we started with an initial research project into narrowing down 5 big issue areas. And one of, I think the top ones for us was poverty, as well as like education and childcare. So that's what we focused on in my year. And then from there, we then narrowed that down to like the specific organizations in the area that dealt with those issues. And then we're luckily able to meet with the people who are organizing the programs or the nonprofits that we were interested in helping. And we actually were able to like go there and visit those places and hear from those people and see people that like actually benefited from what they were doing. And I think that was like super powerful in the way that none of us had gone out into the community that much before in that aspect. And so we were actually able to see that happen.
I'll touch base on our process kind of because we my class had to switch to virtual learning like mid-semester. So our process started off with a needs assessment like Jaclyn spoke about. Um, and similar to what Jaclyn's class needs were, we thought the needs would be the same as well. But when COVID happened, we realized that we kind of had to tweak what our needs would be for the community, what we thought the needs were. Um, and we kind of chose our finalists based off like the needs at the moment and present needs versus like long term, just more just current pressing needs of the community. And we went through Zoom interviews since we weren't able to do site interviews. And we were able to speak with several organizations and just get to learn more about what these organizations are really doing for the community in Binghamton already. And it was really great to see that there are several organizations that are really trying to create like impactful and long-term change in our communities. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing, y'all. So as you were going through the decision-making process and grant-making process, would love to hear what was that process like for you? There's one thing about the issues and trying to understand deeper the issues, but then when you are pulling together the grants and really you all being the ones who are driving what that looks like, how did you, with your peers, sort of decide what the decision-making process and grant-making process would look like? And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to chat about it.
I mean, I can start with this. So for YouthBank Online, we really made it like, we didn't come in as like, so I worked as a peer facilitator rather than like participant. So like that's what perspective I'll be coming in with. And like coming in like planning this, we didn't really say like, oh, we think like all the YouthBank Online participants should decide this way. We had like a group discussion of like, hey, what do you guys think would be the best decision-making process? We talked about ranking grants, giving them numerical scores, different decision-making models like decision by authority, decision by majority, things like that. And then from there, we were able to figure out like, okay, we do want to make criteria and we do want to make it somewhat numerical. And I think Lia can talk more about like our actual process from like small group ranking to like large group. But yeah, we really wanted to make it like what everyone believed was the right process.
Yeah, I can kind of touch on that a little bit. As Alice said, we went through several different decision-making models. Like we kind of had a brief introduction to each different kind of model, and then we decided which one would work best for each small group. So nobody was doing like the same thing. We were all able to decide in our own small groups what we wanted to do specifically, which I think was super helpful because like for me in my small group, I was working with a few other youth and we decided to, I guess we just kind of ranked, each of us ranked the grants or like the proposals ourselves, and then we kind of came together and talked about it and shared our opinions on why we ranked different proposals in a different way. And then hearing everyone's explanations was really important to us, like coming to a conclusion. So listening to different viewpoints and different opinions on the grants and stuff, and like how we thought that they could be like best implemented was really important in that decision making process, because then we ended up actually having a unanimous decision based on like listening to the thoughts and opinions of the other group members. And then from the small groups, we kind of brought it into the larger group, and each group kind of set up their ranking, and then we compared and we discussed, and we ended up choosing which grants to give or like which proposals to actually give the grants to. So there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of like sharing opinions and viewpoints. No one's opinion was like weighed more than someone else's. And so I think in the end it was more of a majority, but everybody had a say. So it was like compromise, it was majority decision making, it was making sure that everybody had the chance to voice their opinion. And so I think that that made it really successful for us in that way, just kind of incorporating different decision making models into something that worked for everybody.
Similar to Lia's experience with the process, I think Jaclyn can also agree that our process was kind of like divided into like large and small scale group making decisions. And I really enjoyed that just because as a small group, we were able to like kind of conversate between which organizations we thought were best fit for this grant. And it was like we had various opinions, and it was kind of, I think, fun to go back and forth with each other, and just like seeing our different perspectives and opinions about which organizations like we resonated most with based on like our core values. And then we would take our decisions as a small group and present it to a larger group. And once we each saw what each group presentation kind of put out there, we decided as a group through like a Google form, and it was kind of anonymous, but at the end, we all felt that our decisions as a large group were still good. And I think the right decision in the long run. So yeah.
Yeah, just to touch a little bit about the decision-making process, like in the Learning by Giving course, I do remember we physically made our own grant applications to send to organizations once we had narrowed it down, asking what the logistics of what they would use the grant for would kind of look like. And during my year, there was this giant debate around like the head versus heart debate of like, do you give like based on your core values and what you feel you want to give to, or do you give based on like the efficiency of the usage of that grant? And for our sake, as a class of, I think it was like 28 of us, we kind of leaned more into that head kind of way, where we analyzed a lot of like the finances or like the financials of the organizations we were looking into, and then like how many like if they were asking for a grant to like buy certain things for a program, it was like how many people can we help this way and like that kind of thing, but then also balancing it with everyone and like their core values and what they thought was most important. And at the end of the day, I would agree with Kassandra that like we still made a decision, and even if we didn't completely agree with what the last decision was, we still knew that it was a good decision.
Yeah, I hear what both of y'all are saying, you know, both groups, and so I'm curious, like, can you either of y'all touch on what you mean by like core values or criteria that were important to you in the grant making process, and what were you holding with core values and criteria?
I mean, I can start off and say that, like, in my experience with YouthBank Online and other YouthBanks, like the criteria is actually a combination of kind of what Jaclyn was talking about, at least in the groups that I've been in. So we sort of adjust it based off of experience, which is like true for a lot of things. So it would be a category for how prepared are they? And then we would break it down and say, like, do they know their finances? Have they contacted the people, like the permissions they need if they're like hosting an event or something like that? And then another section for like the value for money, like is our money going to be put to the correct use? And then another one for like, what is the quality of the idea of this grant? And then so on and so on. Like, I think another important category is like, is it equitable? But like one important point to like make is that in all the groups I've been in, like the criteria is unique, specific to that group and to that community. It changes as new members come in and new things happen in that community. And I think that's like what's one of the things I love about YouthBank is that like it's always a evolving process. And like during the grant decision making process, one of the challenges as like a peer facilitator was that, so I wasn't voting, but like my task was to make sure participants stay true to the criteria that they made. And it sounds like, oh, it'd be easy because like you made the rules, so like why are you not following them? But it's interesting because when you really put your criteria to the test, like you might see things like, oh, I wish we had changed this, but also honoring like being transparent in the YouthBank process. And it wouldn't be fair to your grant applicants if you suddenly change the criteria as you were using it.
Yeah, I agree with Alice. As someone who was part of like the voting, we talked a lot about wide versus deep impact. And so what that kind of means is like wide impact is like how big of an impact is it going to make? Is it going to have a ripple effect? How, like just kind of looking at the amount of people the grant is going to affect and how far it's going to go. And then deep impact is like if we focus our money and our resources in this one thing, can that make a difference for the people who are affected? And so we looked at that as one of our criteria, like how many people will be able to access the what the grant proposers were like proposing versus how effective it would be in like the small section that they're focusing on. And that was something that brought a lot of conversation because there was one group who did they wanted to purchase like a community refrigerator for their youth bank, and so or like their food bank, so they wanted to purchase a refrigerator, and that was more of like a focused impact because it wouldn't obviously impact everybody in the community, but it would impact those who needed it the most. And then there were other groups who were there was one who was looking at making an app to help students with like finding scholarships, finding financial aid opportunities, finding colleges that can help them for their needs. And that would be more of like a wide impact because it would be like spread out, and a bunch of different people would be able to use it. It wasn't like focused on one community. It was focused on how can I make the biggest difference. And so I think that that was something that brought a lot of really interesting conversation for at least my small group.
I think for us, we also had an integrated part of the class that was like a blog going on in the background. And that was a big thing in terms of allowing all 28 of us to kind of get in there and discuss like what philanthropy like meant to us and like what we were hoping to get out of the class experience. And one of the things I do remember is we had a lot of like clashing personalities in our class. We were all coming from like different points of life, and we all had very different core values. And just like the initial, I think first couple of weeks, or we had to determine what those were and like how we were going to work with all these people who had different values than us was super important in that like long-term aspect of having to work with the same 27 other people for like the entire semester. And it wasn't even, we didn't just make the one initial grant. We were able to make, I think, 2 grants because we split the 10,000. And then throughout the course, we were also giving the opportunity to make our own charity pitches every week. So like 3 people would go, and then we would vote out of the 3 people who we would want to give like our own money to. So we would like have a pool of money and decide where that would go to. And I think that was very good to see like our own individual aspects and like what we found important, and bringing that to like our whole class outlook.
Definitely. I think the point of using our core values was to use like our own experiences and to use what was important to ourselves to create impactful change in our community. Because I think when you resonate with something, or when you find something to be closer to your heart, you give that kind of effort into the work that you're doing. So definitely.
Yeah, thanks for sharing all those things about your processes. And just kind of a last round out question that I would love each of you to kind of speak on is, What continues to motivate you to engage in philanthropy and from this experience? And then feel free to respond and then popcorn it to someone.
Personally, the class as a whole, what like pushes me to continue to be like intrigued by philanthropy and to want to like pursue possibly like a career in philanthropy. And similar to Jaclyn, I'm also like interested in pursuing a master's in public administration, just to try to create a change in Binghamton. And I think the fact that the Learning by Giving course allowed us to like use real life dollars was kind of the like a wake up call for me that I could make a change, like by myself with other people, and that I'm not limited to not making a change just because like I am a student. So yeah.
I guess I could go next. So prior to the class, I was actually, I've had a lot of experiences like on the other side of philanthropic giving in terms of like I've benefited from philanthropic giving to like food banks and stuff like that. And my family has benefited a lot from those kinds of help. So being able to be in that class setting where I was the one giving the money away was something I never thought I would have the chance to do. And then seeing that impact and then knowing that like I can kind of continue into this work in a community that I'm already familiar with, thankfully, because of the class, meant a lot to me because it gives me the opportunity to give back to people who were once in a situation or are in a situation that I once was in, or even organizations that helped people like me at one point.
Yeah, I can go next. And I can say that like my experience was really similar to like Kassandra and Jaclyn in that I kind of like fell into YouthBank. So when I joined, it was actually my like freshman year of high school, which is like a long time ago. But like I didn't really know what I was expecting. And I think YouthBank really, it first taught me to like really see issues in my community because like I think as like a student in high school, like you experience a lot of the inequities and things that like frustrate you, but you don't necessarily know how to like identify them. So that was like the first big thing that YouthBank really opened my eyes to. And then it really taught me, okay, and now that you know these issues, you can actually do something about them. Like, I don't think I ever really thought about that in school. Sounds ridiculous, like looking back, but and like since then, like I actually ended up starting the first like Girls Who Code club in my high school because of all the skills that YouthBank taught me. And I think like twofold, like the second part that motivates me to continue to stay involved is like seeing the impact these grants make on people in the community. I've like had the chance to meet with a lot of the people who have benefited from the grants and also just like the youth who have like written and like completed these grants or like these projects. And it's just been like a transformative experience on all sides. And I'd say like it's just so like energizing and rewarding hearing and getting to meet all these like amazing people.
So before I came to YouthBank, I was working at a trauma-informed nonprofit art studio. So it was a small community art studio run by an amazing woman named Lindsay Walls, and it was based in South Minneapolis. And so we would have kids and youth from all over the city come in and just like express themselves through art of like whatever kind, and there wasn't really like any limits. And so that was really interesting to me because it kind of opened me up to like philanthropy, because we would write pitches for grants. We would apply for grants from Google, from big corporations, from big donors. We'd write a lot of thank you letters to donors. I was more on the receiving end. Then in high school, I worked, well, I volunteered a lot. I did a lot of work with, we had a club that was like um, focused on equity and peace and just kind of raising awareness for social justice issues. I kind of carried that with me as I was working at the art studio. And then Aimee and two other members of YouthBank came by to our studio and they were like, hey, do you want to try this out? And so that kind of really clicked with me that I've been on like the receiving end of grant giving. Why can't I give grants? So when I was offered the chance to kind of work with YouthBank online, I like jumped at the chance, and it was really life-changing for me. I ended up changing my major to focus on social justice, and so I'm hoping to go into ethics law because of it. And so I think that kind of carrying these values that I've learned and these skills have really helped me kind of focus myself on what I want my career to be, how I want to make an impact, and like make connections with people who I can work with or who I can work for. And so I think that that was really important to me.
Wow, thanks y'all for sharing that and your experiences. I'm gonna bring Shanna back, and we would love to open it up for some Q&A.
Okay, here I am. Thank you so much for being patient. What a powerful panel we have here. It's amazing to hear your experiences. And I think you all are exceptional. And at the same time, I think many of your peers that have gone through this process with you would probably echo a lot of those sentiments here. So thank you all. And I'd just like to reflect on a few different things. Like number one, I saw just such intense listening from the panelists, which is, I think, is something that comes out of experiential collective philanthropy. You guys learn to listen to one another. You learn to listen to the community. You learn to listen to nonprofits who are sort of the experts at their work. So I saw a lot of listening here today. So thank you. I heard about creating the decision-making model and collectively deciding on how to make decisions, which is very meta, and I love it. I also heard about balancing the head and the heart and being very intentional with your grant making. So thank you all. This is great so far. And we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to jump right in. This question is for Alice, but I'm also, if any other panelist feels called to speak to it, like feel free to jump in after Alice has finished. Alice, how much experience did you have with philanthropy before joining YouthBank?
So before joining YouthBank at my local town, I had no experience whatsoever with philanthropy. But before joining YouthBank online, I had like 4 years of experience.
Kassandra, same question.
Similar to Alice, I did not have any experience with philanthropy. I never had like much exposure to what it was really about. In high school, it was kind of like surface level information about philanthropy, but never really how I could use philanthropy to impact my own community. And it wasn't really until I took the Learning by Giving course that I saw how just inspiring philanthropy really is. And that's when I really got like intrigued with it. And I think something else that I've come to realize is just that like I always knew that I wanted to help my community, but I wasn't really sure how I was gonna do that. But through this course, I really learned that this is how I wanna just help my own community out.
Thank you. Jaclyn, I'm curious if you knew your sort of passion and your career path before joining the philanthropy class, and sort of how the philanthropy class took you on a different path or helped you on your path.
So actually, when I started as a freshman, I was a biology major, interested into going into cancer research. And I'm still a biology major. I'm just now a double major with political science and a minor also. But taking the philanthropy class kind of really shifted my views. That whole initial first step of like, what are my core values and what do I find important, made me reflect on a lot of things that have happened just like prior to the class, which was, I don't want to like take too much time, but one of the things that has happened in my life was my mom had breast cancer when I was growing up. And so I got to see a lot of the benefits of grant making on the other end of things. And like organizations that I know have benefited from grants could then give to families like mine, in which we needed funds to like buy food for the week or celebrate Christmas or just like basic things that make a life like worth living. And that was very impactful for me in terms of kind of shifting what I want to do now to giving back to communities and helping people who need it. And that's kind of where I've been coming from, and the opportunity to stay here in Binghamton and do something with my MPA for 2 more years in this community that I've already learned about means so much to me.
Thank you. Same question, Lia. It sounds like you kind of had a passion and then YouthBank really helped you develop it. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, growing up in South Minneapolis, my community is very diverse. I went to an elementary school where the majority of students were low income, immigrant students of color who didn't speak English as a first language. So what we did was we do a lot of like food drives. So starting in kindergarten, everyone in the class, if they could, would bring in like boxed food or canned food for holidays and stuff like that to make sure that members of our community would have food to celebrate like holidays with their families and stuff like that. And so that's kind of like when I realized like I could use like my privilege to other people's advantage. And so I started getting involved with the art studio and kind of learning about how different processes can be healing and restorative towards like trauma in youth. Which obviously like there is a lot of if you're growing up in like low income or if you're a person of color, there's just like that trauma that you carry with you. And so being able to work with and for other youth was really important to me. And then being able to experience YouthBank online was like really eye-opening for me. I ended up changing my major from biology like Jaclyn to history and the philosophy of social justice. So I'm looking at going to law school for ethics rather than research. I think that YouthBank was really helpful in like kind of opening my eyes to like what I really wanted to do and how I really wanted to make a difference.
Thank you. We have 1 more minute, so I would love to hear from all of you on, you can answer 1 of 2 questions, maybe in just a couple sentences. What is the most valuable thing you took away from your grant making experience? Or what advice do you have to other youth who might get involved in grant making? Jaclyn, would you like to start?
Sure. So I'll take the advice for other youth that want to get involved. I think just start small. Think about what's important to you and give what you can give. And from there, just look for opportunities where you can grow that interest and keep going.
I'll add on to Jaclyn for advice. Just giving doesn't have to be directly through money. It could be your time, volunteering. So if you want to start on a smaller scale, just go out into your community and volunteer for a nonprofit organization or at a community center, and that's just one way you could start. Yeah.
I would build off of that and say like make the most of your network. So like anyone from your friends, your teachers, student groups your friends are in, even one of the things that YouthBank really opened my eyes to was like how connected I am with my community. I didn't realize that before.
Yeah, I agree. Using your network to your advantage is really helpful, but also like trusting yourself and your abilities. Like if you know, like if you're passionate about something, follow it. like that's honestly the best thing you can do.
I think a lot of their advice reflects what we're hearing from the Giving Circle Conference. And so you all are so inspiring to us, and thank you so much for your time. I know a lot of you have finals and you know, life can get really hectic. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Aimee and YouthBank, and we'll see everyone later.